The diplomatic vessel called the Silent Promise moved through the empty darkness between stars. It was a beautiful ship, built from materials that caught light and scattered it like water droplets in sunlight. The hull was pale blue and silver, curved in ways that made it look more like a living thing than a machine. Inside its walls, 12 members of the diplomatic corps waited in a room with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Ambassador Al stood near the largest window, all 4 of his eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. His gray fur was neat and carefully groomed, as befitting someone of his rank. His claws were retracted, hidden inside the soft pads of his fingers, a sign of peaceful intent. But his secondary eyes, the smaller pair that sat above his main ones, kept darting toward the door. He was afraid. They were all afraid. "The human shuttle has requested docking permission," announced the ship's communication officer, her voice carefully neutral. "They will arrive in approximately 15 minutes. Al turned to face his delegation. They were experienced diplomats, chosen for this mission because of their skill and their calm temperaments. But he could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their ears lay flat against their skulls, the slight trembling in their whiskers. "Remember your training," he said, keeping his own voice steady. "Humans are our potential allies. They have shown no aggression toward our species. This is a routine diplomatic meeting to discuss trade and cultural exchange." "With respect, Ambassador," said the senior diplomat who served as Al's second in command, "there is nothing routine about humans." Was old, his fur had gone white around his muzzle, and his movements were slower than they had once been. But his mind was sharp, and he had spent decades studying alien species. He had been the one to brief the delegation on what they might expect. "I have read every report we have on human behavior," continued. "I have watched every piece of footage available to our intelligence services. I have spoken with survivors of encounters with humans." He paused, his throat sacs inflating slightly with stress. "I am more afraid now than I was before I began my research." A young at the back of the room shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His name was O, and he was the youngest member of the delegation by a significant margin. He had been included because his family had connections to the High Council, and because someone had thought that having a fresh perspective might be valuable. O had never seen a human before. He had grown up on one of the inner worlds, far from the borders where humans and occasionally crossed paths. Everything he knew about humans came from educational materials and the whispered stories that adults told each other when they thought the young ones were not listening. "What exactly should we expect?" asked one of the mid-ranking diplomats, a female named Era who specialized in economic negotiations. "The briefings mentioned that humans are dangerous, but they did not explain what that means in practical terms." Walked to the center of the room, moving with the careful dignity of someone who knew that everyone was watching him. "Humans are persistent predators," he said. "Do you know what that means?" Era shook her head. "Most predators in the galaxy hunt by ambush or by speed. They chase their prey for short distances, relying on explosive power to make a kill. If the prey escapes the initial attack, it usually survives." His voice grew quieter. "Humans are different. Their ancestors evolved on a planet where they were not the fastest or the strongest creatures. They could not catch their prey in a sprint, so instead they learned to follow it." "Follow it where?" O asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Looked at the young male with something that might have been pity. "Everywhere, a human would begin following an animal in the morning and continue following it all day long. Not running, just walking, steady, relentless. The prey would run away, hide, rest, and think it was safe. Then the human would appear again, still walking, still following. This would continue for hours, sometimes days. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion and the human would kill it." The room was silent. "They do not stop," said. "That is the first thing you must understand about humans. Whatever else they are, whatever else they do not stop. They cannot be outrun because they will keep coming. They cannot be outlasted because they will keep trying. The only way to survive a human is to convince it that you are not prey." "But we are not prey," Era said. "We are allies, potential allies." "Yes," agreed. "And that is what makes this meeting so delicate. We must ensure that the humans continue to see us as allies, because if they ever decide we are enemies." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The communication officer spoke again. "The human shuttle has docked. Their representative is proceeding to the airlock." Al straightened his posture and smoothed down his fur. "Everyone to your positions. Remember, we are here to build bridges between our species. Whatever fears we have, we leave them at the door. The humans must see us as confident, capable partners." The delegation arranged themselves in a semicircle facing the main entrance, with Al at the center, stood at his right side, and the other diplomats spread out according to their rank and function. O found himself at the far end of the formation, near the wall, where junior staff observed and learned without participating directly. He was glad for the position. It meant he could watch without being watched in return. The airlock cycled through its security protocols. There was a hiss of equalizing pressure, a series of mechanical clunks as the seals released, and then the door slid open. She walked in alone. O's first thought was that she was small. He had expected humans to be large, to match the threat they represented in his imagination. But this female was shorter than most of the in the room, and her frame was slender beneath her formal uniform. Her skin was a pale pinkish color, like certain types of stone that were used in decorative carvings. Her hair was brown, pulled back from her face and secured in a simple arrangement at the back of her head. Her eyes were unusual, round with colored centers that reminded O of autumn leaves just before they fell from the trees. She was wearing a uniform of dark blue with silver decorations at the collar and cuffs. The cut was simple and practical, without any of the elaborate ornamentation that diplomats favored. She carried no visible weapons, no protective equipment, nothing except a thin tablet tucked under one arm. She looked harmless. She looked soft. She smiled at them, and O watched every adult in the room go perfectly still. "Ambassador Al," she said, and her voice was warm and pleasant like a stream flowing over smooth stones. "It is an honor to meet you. I am Lieutenant Commander Grace, representing the United Earth Coalition. On behalf of humanity, I welcome the opportunity to strengthen the friendship between our peoples." She extended her hand toward Al, palm facing upward in what O knew was a traditional human greeting gesture. It was meant to show that the person held no weapons, that they came in peace. Al did not move. For a long moment, nobody moved. O could see the tension in the room like a physical thing, a weight pressing down on everyone present. The human female, Grace, stood there with her hand extended and her smile unwavering, as if she had all the time in the world to wait for a response. Finally, Al reached out and touched her hand briefly, the minimum contact required by protocol. "Lieutenant Commander, the people are grateful for your willingness to engage in these discussions. Please, let us proceed to the conference chamber where we can speak in greater comfort." "Of course," Grace said. She lowered her hand without any sign of offense at the abbreviated greeting. "Please lead the way." As the delegation began to move toward the inner corridors of the ship, O fell into step at the rear of the group, where he could observe without being noticed. He found his eyes drawn to the human again and again, studying her the way he might study a dangerous animal at a safe distance. She moved strangely. It took him a moment to understand what was wrong. Most beings, when they walked, wasted movement. They swayed slightly or took steps that were longer or shorter than necessary, or let their arms swing in patterns that served no purpose. It was normal. It was the way living things moved through space without perfect efficiency. Grace did not waste movement. Every step she took was precisely calibrated, her feet landing exactly where they needed to land. Her arms moved in controlled arcs that complemented her stride. Her head turned smoothly from side to side as she looked at her surroundings, and O had the uncomfortable feeling that she was memorizing everything she saw without appearing to pay particular attention to anything. She walked like a hunting animal, he realized, like the predators in the educational films that his teachers had shown him when he was young. Those films had demonstrated how different species pursued their prey, and one of the common features was the economy of motion. A predator could not afford to waste energy on unnecessary movements. Every action had to serve a purpose. But she was smiling. Her expression was friendly and open, her body language relaxed and approachable. If O had seen only her face, he would have thought she was the least threatening being in the room. It was the contrast that disturbed him, the mismatch between what her face said and what her body did. Like two different creatures had been combined into one form that could not quite decide what it wanted to be. The conference chamber was a large oval room with a long table at its center, surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate anatomy. Grace looked at the chairs for a moment, then chose one and settled into it with apparent comfort, even though the design was clearly not meant for her species. The diplomats took their seats, and the formal negotiations began. O sat in an observation alcove at the edge of the room, along with the other junior staff members. They were there to watch and learn, to take notes on technique and strategy, and to provide support if any of the senior diplomats needed assistance. But mostly, they were there to observe. For the first 2 hours, the meeting was boring. Grace spoke about trade routes and resource allocation. She discussed the possibility of establishing cultural exchange programs that would allow students to study on human worlds and human students to visit space. She presented data on economic projections and mutual defense considerations. Her voice remained pleasant throughout, her smile appearing at appropriate moments, her attention focused entirely on whoever was speaking at any given time. She was, O had to admit, extremely good at her job. She listened carefully to questions and concerns, acknowledged valid points even when they contradicted her positions, and offered compromises that seemed genuinely fair to both sides. She treated the diplomats with consistent respect, never talking down to them or dismissing their perspectives. If he had not been watching her body, O might have forgotten why everyone was afraid. But he was watching, and so he noticed things that the others seemed to miss. The way her eyes tracked movement at the edges of the room, even while she appeared to be looking at whoever was speaking. The way her posture shifted slightly whenever someone new entered or left the chamber. The way her hands rested on the table in front of her, never far from the edge, always positioned for quick movement. She was aware of everything. She was always aware of everything. The break for lunch came as a relief to everyone. The tension of maintaining diplomatic composure had worn on the delegation, and O could see the exhaustion in their faces as they rose from the table. "Lieutenant Commander," Al said formally, "would you do us the honor of joining us for the midday meal?" "I would be delighted," Grace said. The dining area was smaller than the conference chamber, designed for informal gatherings rather than official functions. A variety of foods had been prepared, including several dishes that O knew had been specifically created to accommodate human dietary requirements. Grace selected a human meal, something wrapped in a thin layer of grain that contained vegetables and some type of meat. She ate it with her hands, taking bites directly from the wrapped food and chewing with apparent enjoyment. O watched her teeth. They were small, much smaller than teeth. The front ones were flat, designed for cutting rather than tearing. The ones further back were broader, built for grinding food into paste. There were no obvious fangs, no specialized killing teeth like those found in most predatory species. And yet, when she bit into her food, O saw the way her jaw muscles moved beneath her skin. There was strength there, hidden beneath the soft exterior. The flat teeth at the front sheared through the grain wrap with clean efficiency. The grinding teeth at the back processed the food with mechanical precision. A drop of sauce landed on her finger, and she raised her hand to her mouth and licked it clean without pausing her conversation with, who had somehow ended up seated beside her. Her tongue was pink and flexible, wrapping around her finger with casual precision. O realized that the room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching her eat, even though they were pretending not to. Even the servers who had brought the food were finding excuses to linger near the edges of the room. Grace appeared not to notice, or perhaps she did notice and simply did not care. She finished her meal, wiped her hands on a small cloth napkin, and smiled at the table. "That was excellent," she said. My compliments to your culinary staff. The sauce on the vegetables was particularly good. We are pleased you enjoyed it, Al said. His own meal sat barely touched in front of him. The afternoon session continued the pattern of the morning. More discussions about treaties and trade agreements. More charts and projections displayed on screens around the conference table. More polite exchanges that masked the underlying fear that O could taste in the air like metal. 3 hours after lunch, something changed. The lights flickered. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. The illumination in the room dipped for perhaps half a second, then returned to normal. Most of the delegates did not even look up from their documents. Grace's head snapped toward the door. Her entire posture transformed in an instant. The pleasant, relaxed diplomat vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Her spine straightened. Her shoulders squared. Her hands moved from the table to her lap, fingers slightly curled, positioning themselves for action. Her face went blank. The smile disappeared, the warm expression fading into something cold and calculating. Her eyes swept across the room in a single smooth motion, cataloging every person, every piece of furniture, every potential exit. O saw it happen. He saw the mask fall away. What looked out from Grace's autumn-colored eyes was not the friendly diplomat who had spent the day discussing trade routes. It was something older, something that had learned to assess threats and calculate responses in the time it took to draw a single breath. Something that had already decided what it would do if danger appeared, and was simply waiting to execute its plans. The expression lasted for perhaps 2 seconds. Then the emergency alarms began to wail, and the other diplomats finally realized that something was wrong. "What is happening?" Al demanded, rising from his seat. Grace stood as well, and her movement was utterly different from the way she had moved before. There was no wasted motion now, no pretense of casual comfort. She moved like a weapon being drawn from a sheath. "Hull breach," she said. Her voice had changed too. It was still calm, but the warmth had drained away, leaving behind something cold and precise. "Adjacent section, approximately 30 meters from this location. The pressure differential suggests a controlled cut rather than accidental damage." "How do you know that?" asked. "The alarms only just started." "I heard it," Grace said simply. O felt the fur on his spine rise. His species had some of the most sensitive hearing in the known galaxy, evolved over millions of years to detect predators approaching through dense vegetation. He had heard nothing unusual before the alarms began. But she had heard it. With her inferior human ears, her small and rounded audio receptors that should not have been able to detect sounds at that range. Or perhaps it was not her ears that had heard it. Perhaps it was something else. Some instinct bred into her species over countless generations of survival, some ability to sense danger that went beyond the normal senses. "Ambassador Al," Grace said, "I recommend that you move your delegation to the interior wall, away from the door. The breach may have compromised the integrity of the adjacent corridors." "Surely our security teams will handle whatever this is," Era said. Her voice was shaking. "I am certain they will attempt to do so," Grace replied. "But I have found that it is wise to prepare for unfavorable outcomes while hopping for favorable ones." The door to the conference chamber exploded inward. O threw himself backward, tumbling out of his observation alcove and landing hard on the floor. Around him, the other junior staff members were screaming, scrambling for cover behind furniture and walls. The senior diplomats were in similar disarray, their careful composure shattered by the sudden violence. Through the smoke and debris of the destroyed door, figures emerged. There were 7 of them. Al pirates, recognizable by their distinctive chitin plating and their multiple limbs. Each one carried weapons, plasma cutters that could slice through hull metal, neural disruptors that could paralyze a target with a single shot. Their bodies were built for combat, with armored plates protecting their vital organs and sharp edges along their limbs that could serve as natural weapons. The leader was larger than the others from previous battles, with patterns etched into his chitin that marked him as a veteran raider. He swept his weapon across the room, and the diplomats froze under its threat. "Nobody moves," the pirate leader said. His voice was a harsh clicking sound like bones breaking against each other. "We are here for your encryption keys. Give them to us and some of you might survive this day." Al stepped forward, placing himself between the pirates and his delegation. His fear was obvious, his body trembling, but he refused to let his people be threatened without response. "We are diplomats," he said. "We have no encryption keys of value. You have made a mistake." The pirate leader laughed. "A diplomatic vessel does not travel without access codes to your government's secure communications. We know what you carry, ambassador. The only question is how many of your people will die before you give it to us." "Please," Al said. "There are young ones here, staff members who know nothing of secure communications. Let them go and we will discuss your demands." "There is nothing to discuss." The pirate raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Al's chest. "Give us the codes or I will start killing your people one by one." Grace stepped forward. She moved past Al, past the cowering diplomats, past the junior staff members who were huddled against the walls. She walked toward the pirates with the same economical stride that O had noticed earlier, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. Her face was calm. Her eyes were fixed on the pirate leader. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, empty of any weapon. "I am afraid I cannot allow that," she said. The pirate leader stared at her. His compound eyes clicked and refocused, taking in her small frame, her unarmed state, her soft and vulnerable appearance. He laughed again. "One little human thinks she can stop us." He gestured at the armed raiders behind him. "Look around you, soft skin. You are outnumbered, and what exactly do you think you can do?" Grace smiled. It was not the warm, pleasant smile she had worn throughout the diplomatic negotiations. This smile was different. It was the smile of something that had spent millions of years learning how to kill things larger and stronger than itself. It was the smile of a species that had risen to dominance on a world filled with predators. It was the smile of a persistent hunter looking at prey that did not yet understand that it had already lost. "I think I can do quite a lot," she said. And then she moved. O had studied combat. It was part of the standard education for anyone involved in diplomacy, because sometimes negotiations failed, and it was important to understand what that failure looked like. He had watched recordings of battles, of trained soldiers fighting against various threats. He thought he understood what violence looked like. He was wrong. Grace did not fight like a soldier. She did not assume stances or execute maneuvers or follow any pattern that O could recognize. She simply moved, and where she moved, pirates fell. The leader fired his weapon, but she was not where the shot went. She had already shifted, anticipating the angle of his attack before he pulled the trigger. Her hand closed around his weapon arm, and she twisted in a way that used his own mass against him. There was a crack of breaking chitin, a scream of pain, and the pirate leader was falling, his arm bent at an angle that should not have been possible. The second pirate raised his neural disruptor. Grace used the falling body of the leader as a shield, pushing it into the line of fire. The disruptor blast hit the leader instead, and his scream cut off as his nervous system overloaded. She was already moving past him, closing the distance to the second pirate before he could adjust his aim. Her palm struck the center of his thorax, exactly where the respiratory membrane was located beneath his chitin plating. The membrane ruptured. The pirate collapsed, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except drown in his own internal fluids. 2 down, 5 remaining. Perhaps 3 seconds had passed. The third and fourth pirates opened fire simultaneously, filling the space where Grace had been standing with overlapping beams of plasma. But she was not there anymore. She had dropped low, beneath the angle of their shots, and rolled across the floor with a speed that seemed impossible for her species. When she came up, she was inside the guard of the third pirate. Her elbow struck his throat with surgical precision, crushing the structures that allowed him to vocalize and breathe. He fell without making a sound. The fourth pirate tried to turn his weapon toward her, but she grabbed his arm and used his own momentum to spin him around. Her fingers found something in the back of his neck, some nerve cluster or vital structure that O did not recognize. She pressed, and the pirate went limp. 4 down, 3 remaining. Perhaps 5 seconds had passed. The fifth pirate abandoned his weapon and tried to run. He made it exactly 3 steps before Grace caught him. Her legs drove her forward with explosive power, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Her hand closed on his shoulder, spun him around, and her forehead connected with the center of his face. The impact shattered his sensory cluster. He was blind before he hit the ground. 5 down, 2 remaining. Perhaps 7 seconds had passed. The sixth pirate was screaming something in his own language, firing wildly in Grace's direction. She moved through his shots like water flowing around stones, never quite where his weapon was pointed. A decorative metal stand became a projectile in her hands, hurled with deadly accuracy. It struck the pirate's weapon, knocking it aside, and then she was on him. Her hands moved too fast for O to track. There were sounds of impact, of chitin cracking, of joints being forced past their natural range of motion. The pirate fell, and he did not get up. 6 down, 1 remaining. Perhaps 9 seconds had passed. The last pirate was young, barely past adolescence by the standards of his species. He had dropped his weapon at some point during the carnage and was now backing away from the human female with his manipulator limbs raised in surrender. Grace stopped. She stood in the center of 6 bodies, some still twitching, some already still. Her breathing was slightly elevated, visible in the rise and fall of her chest, but her face was calm. Her uniform had acquired a few spots of alien blood, but she appeared completely uninjured. She looked at the young pirate, and something shifted in her expression. "Smart choice," she said. Her voice was the same pleasant tone she had used in the conference room, as if the last 11 seconds had never happened. "Security will be here shortly. I suggest you stay very, very still until they arrive." The young pirate nodded frantically. He sank to his knees, his entire body shaking, his compound eyes fixed on the human female with an expression of pure terror. Grace turned to face the delegation. They were all staring at her. Every single one of them, from Ambassador Al to the lowest-ranking junior staff member, was staring at her with expressions that mixed fear and awe in equal measure. "Is everyone all right?" Grace asked. Her voice was warm and concerned, as if she was genuinely worried about there. "Is anyone injured?" Nobody answered. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the room, turning the scene into something from a nightmare. Bodies on the floor, the smell of blood and burned chitin, the soft-looking human female standing in the middle of it all, asking if anyone needed help. O found that he was shaking. His entire body was trembling, and he could not make it stop. He had just watched a single unarmed human kill 6 armed pirates in less than 15 seconds, moving with a speed and precision that should not have been possible. And now she was asking if anyone was hurt. The contrast was terrifying. Security teams arrived within minutes, flooding into the damaged conference chamber with weapons drawn and tactical armor gleaming under the emergency lights. They found the delegation huddled against the interior wall, the dead pirates scattered across the floor, and Grace sitting calmly in one of the conference chairs, filling out something on her tablet. "Lieutenant Commander," the security chief said, approaching her with obvious caution. "We received reports of an intrusion. Can you tell us what happened here?" Grace looked up from her tablet and smiled. "Al raiders, 7 of them. They breached the hull and attempted to take hostages for ransom." She gestured at the bodies on the floor. "The situation has been resolved." The security chief looked at the bodies, looked at Grace, looked at the bodies again. "You resolved it." "I had some training in close-quarters combat during my military service," Grace said. Her tone made it sound like she was discussing a hobby, not a massacre. "It seemed prudent to intervene before they could harm any of the diplomats." "You killed 6 armed pirates by yourself," the security chief said, "with your bare hands." "I try to stay in shape," Grace said. She returned to her tablet, apparently finished with the conversation. The security chief stood there for a long moment, clearly unsure how to respond. Finally, he turned to his team and began issuing orders for the bodies to be removed and the crime scene to be documented. O watched Grace from across the room. She was sitting with perfect posture, her fingers moving across her tablet as she typed her incident report. Someone had brought her a cup of something warm, and she held it in one hand while she worked, occasionally taking small sips. She looked like a mid-level administrator doing routine paperwork. She looked like the least dangerous being in the room. O knew better now. He found himself walking toward her before he had consciously decided to do so. His legs carried him across the debris-strewn floor, past the security officers and the medical teams, until he was standing in front of the human female. She looked up at him, and her eyes were kind. "Yes, oh, isn't it? Junior assistant to the diplomatic delegation." "You remembered my name?" he said. His voice came out steadier than he had expected. "I remember everyone's name," she said. "It's polite." He sat down across from her, his legs folding in the way of his species. For a long moment he just looked at her soft skin, her small teeth, her gentle expression, at the hands that had killed 6 beings in 11 seconds. "I have a question," he said finally. "Ask." He hesitated, trying to find the right words. Everything he had seen was still processing in his mind, still fitting itself into his understanding of the universe. The educational materials he had studied, the stories he had heard, none of them had prepared him for the reality of what humans were. "Why does the apex predator wear a human mask?" he asked. Grace's smile shifted. It did not disappear, but it changed into something more real, something a little sad and a little proud. She set down her tablet and gave him her full attention. "That's a very good question," she said. "Do you want the diplomatic answer or the real answer?" "The real one, please." She looked at him for a moment, studying his face with those autumn-colored eyes. Then she nodded, as if she had decided something. "Millions of years ago," she said, "my ancestors were not the hunters, we were the hunted. Small, soft, weak, just like we look now. Everything on our world wanted to eat us. The big cats, the wolves, the bears, the crocodiles, even some of the birds, we should have gone extinct 1,000 times over." "But you didn't," O said. "No, we didn't. Instead, we learned." Grace held up her hand, showing him her blunt fingernails, her soft palm. "This body isn't designed to kill, O. Look at me. No claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. By all logic, we should be prey for anything with sharper teeth or faster legs." "Then how did you survive?" "We cheated." Grace smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "We learned to run longer than anything else could run. Our ancestors would pick a target and follow it across the savannah for hours, sometimes days. Not fast, just relentless. The prey would sprint away, rest, think it was safe. Then the humans would appear again, still walking, still following. This would continue until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Then we would kill it." She tapped her temple. "The predator isn't in my claws or my teeth, oh, it's in here and here." She placed her hand over her heart. "We learned to think, to plan, to work together, to use tools when our bodies weren't enough. We turned our weaknesses into weapons." "But that doesn't explain the mask," O said. "You could show your true nature all the time. You don't have to pretend to be harmless." Grace was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "We are not pretending," she said. "The gentleness is as real as the violence. That's what makes humans different from most predators. We can choose. Every day we wake up and choose what we want to be. Most of the time we choose kindness. We choose to smile, to build, to help, to protect. We choose to be the mask instead of what's underneath. And when someone threatens you..." Grace's eyes went distant, and O glimpsed something ancient looking back at him through those autumn-colored windows. Something that had watched from tall grass as bigger creatures passed by. Something that had learned patience and cunning and the cold arithmetic of survival. "Then we remember what we had to become to survive," she said quietly. "And we become it again, as many times as necessary, for as long as necessary, until our people are safe." She blinked, and the pleasant diplomat returned. "The 7th pirate," O said. "The young one, you spared him." "Yes." "Why?" Grace looked toward the corner where the surviving pirate was being held by security officers. He was still shaking, still staring at nothing, still processing the trauma of what he had witnessed. "Because he surrendered," she said. "Because he was young and afraid and made the right choice when it mattered. Because killing someone who has given up is murder, not combat." She paused. "And because the mask isn't just something we show to other species, it's something we show to ourselves. Every time we choose mercy over violence, we remind ourselves who we want to be. Even after what he and his companions tried to do. Especially after that. It's easy to be kind when nothing is at stake. The true test of character is how we behave when we have every reason to be cruel and no one would blame us for it." Thought about this for a long time. Around them, the cleanup continued. Bodies were removed, damage was assessed, reports were filed. The diplomatic delegation slowly emerged from their shock and began the process of recovering their composure. But O stayed where he was, sitting across from the human female who had killed 6 pirates and then asked if anyone needed help. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For the answer, for the honesty." Grace smiled at him, and it was a genuine smile, warm and real. "You asked a good question," she said. "You deserved a good answer." She picked up her tablet again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have paperwork to finish. Incident reports don't write themselves, unfortunately." O stood and walked back to where the other junior staff members were gathered. They looked at him with expressions of amazement and confusion, unable to understand why he had approached the human, what he had been thinking. He did not explain. Some things were difficult to put into words. The diplomatic negotiations resumed the following day, after the damage had been repaired and the security protocols had been reviewed. Grace sat in the same chair she had occupied before the attack, wearing a fresh uniform, her tablet once again tucked neatly in front of her. She smiled at the delegation as they took their seats. "I believe we were discussing the terms of the cultural exchange program," she said pleasantly. "Shall we continue where we left off?" Stared at her for a long moment. His throat sacs inflated and deflated several times before he could bring himself to speak. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, I believe we shall." The negotiations proceeded smoothly after that. The diplomats were more attentive than before, more willing to listen, more open to compromise. They treated Grace with a new respect that bordered on reverence. O understood why. They had seen beneath the mask. They had witnessed what humanity truly was, what they were capable of when the situation demanded it. And they had also seen something else, something equally important. They had seen the human choose to put the mask back on. They had seen her return to kindness after violence, to gentleness after brutality, to diplomacy after death. They had seen her treat the aftermath of a massacre as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a trauma to be processed. And they had realized something that changed everything. Humans were not dangerous because of what they could do. Every species in the galaxy had the capacity for violence. What made humans terrifying was their control, their ability to turn the predator on and off like a switch, their capacity to kill 6 beings in 11 seconds and then sit down to complete paperwork as if nothing had happened. The mask was not a weakness, it was a demonstration of power. It said, "I could destroy you, but I choose not to. I could be a monster, but I choose to be kind. I have the strength to be cruel, and I use that strength to be gentle instead." That was what made humanity the apex predator of the galaxy. Not their violence, but their choice. 3 weeks later, the diplomatic mission concluded with a successful treaty signing. Trade agreements were finalized. Cultural exchange programs were established. The foundation was laid for a lasting alliance between humans and... Grace shook hands with Ambassador Al at the closing ceremony. She smiled her warm smile and spoke her pleasant words, and gave no indication that she was anything other than a dedicated diplomat who had successfully completed her assignment. O watched her go as she boarded her shuttle to return to human space. She had nodded at him once, a small acknowledgement that they shared something, an understanding that transcended species and culture. He raised one hand in farewell. She raised one hand in return. The shuttle departed, carrying its human passenger back to wherever she had come from, leaving behind only memories and questions and a story that would be told for generations. In the weeks that followed, O was promoted twice. His insights during the crisis had been noted by the senior diplomats, and his willingness to engage with the human had marked him as someone with potential. He was assigned to a new position, one that involved analyzing human behavior and advising the government on future diplomatic initiatives. He took to the work with dedication, spending long hours studying human history, human psychology, human culture. He learned about their wars and their art, their cruelty and their compassion, their capacity for destruction and their drive to create. The more he learned, the more he understood what grace had meant. Humans were not monsters pretending to be civilized. They were civilized beings who had never forgotten what it meant to be monsters. Every structure of their society, every law and custom and moral code, was designed to keep the predator sleeping. They built institutions to contain their violence, channeling their aggressive instincts into competition and sport and exploration. And when those institutions failed, when the predator was needed, they could call it forth again. They could become what they had been before civilization, before agriculture, before language itself. They could tap into something primal and ancient and utterly ruthless. Then, when the threat was past, they could put it away again. They could smile and shake hands and discuss trade agreements as if nothing had happened. That was the human gift, that was their curse, that was why they wore the mask. Because beneath it was something so terrible that even they feared it. Years passed. O rose through the ranks of the diplomatic corps, eventually becoming an ambassador himself. He negotiated dozens of treaties with dozens of species, traveling across the galaxy and learning things that his younger self could never have imagined. But he never forgot the day he watched a human kill 6 pirates with her bare hands. He never forgot the question he had asked her, or the answer she had given. And when he had cubs of his own, when they were old enough to ask about the strange beings called humans, he sat them down and told them the story. "They seem so nice," his youngest daughter said afterward, her fur bristling with confusion. "But everyone says they're dangerous. I don't understand." O smiled, remembering brown hair and autumn-colored eyes, and a pleasant voice that could turn to steel. "They are nice," he said. "Most of the time, with their friends, their families, strangers they meet who mean them no harm. The mask isn't a disguise, little one. It's who they want to be." "Then why is everyone afraid of them?" "Because of what's underneath. Because of what happens when you threaten them or the people they care about." O paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Humans are monsters who chose to become friends, and that's much more frightening than a monster who has no choice." "Why?" "Because it means they could choose differently, at any moment, and yet they don't. Every single day, billions of humans wake up and decide to be kind, to be gentle, to be the mask instead of what's underneath." His daughter thought about this for a long time. "I think I want to be friends with them," she said finally. O pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her small body against his own. "Good," he said. "That's the right choice." Outside the window of their home, the stars burned cold and bright in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, human ships moved through the void, carrying their strange cargo of kindness and lethality, smiling at the universe and daring it to give them a reason to stop. The universe wisely smiled back. And in diplomatic chambers and trading posts and colony worlds across the galaxy, humans continued to wear their masks. They continued to choose kindness. They continued to build and explore and protect, reaching out to other species with open hands and warm words. But beneath the surface, always, the predator waited. Not sleeping exactly, more like resting, conserving its strength for the day when it might be needed again, for the day when some fool decided to threaten what humanity held dear. On that day, the masks would fall. On that day, the galaxy would remember why humans had survived a world that was trying to kill them. On that day, the apex predator would show its true face. But until then, the humans would smile. They would always smile. It was, after all, what made them human. The end.